Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Richardson. I'm a product line manager at AppNexus. I focus on header bidding, SSP, header bidding things, kind of a broad mandate, but this is very much in my wheelhouse.
And I'm Tom Levesque, product management at Index Exchange. I look after all of our server-to-server offerings, including in the context of header bidding.
So we're up on stage, frenemies, friends.
We've decided to stand roughly this close.
Right. See, it's getting a little too close.
They had the chairs all the way over there at the beginning and brought them back.
But we're here to talk about server-to-server in general, talk about what's happening in the space, talk about where we see it going. We had a recent partnership announcement. We'll talk a little bit about that, poke fun at ourselves about that in a little bit. And we'd love to hear feedback from you. This is certainly a hot topic in the industry right now. We'd like this to be reasonably informal to a variety of degrees. So having two product managers up here talking about server-to-server header bidding and header bidding in general hopefully is a useful bit of time.
Yeah, I'd echo that. We want this to be a discussion, so feel free to reach out. Even while we're presenting, if you see something and say, hey, I really want to know more about that, let's. We're happy to engage.
So, kind of level setting a little bit. Header bidding, I'm sure all of you have seen variations on this slide or somebody telling you this probably only 30,000 times in the past 2 quarters or something like that. It has been incredibly impactful on the industry, not just from a pure revenue lift perspective, as many of you can attest, but also just from a fundamental shifting of how ad tech works and how ad tech works with vendors on one side, publishers on the other, across the entire ecosystem. And really it's the destruction of the waterfall that header bidding accomplishes that is really incredibly impactful here. And I think that even though we've been very, pushing forward for this for the past 18 months or so, it's still incredibly new. We're still in an early experimentation phase in header bidding to a pretty large degree. And so what's happening now is that we're sort of saying like, okay, this is a thing. There are consequences here that are long-lasting. We can't put the genie back into the lamp at this point. It's out. It's causing havoc and destruction and wonderful revenue lifts across the entire industry. So let's take a look now and sort of see how we can take this experimentation stage and move it more towards the optimization stage and put in not just safety characteristics, but also set up the next stage of innovation and experimentation there.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, we know that this sort of real-time competition between exchanges isn't going away, right? When we see publishers get 10, 20, 30% revenue lift when they turn on this kind of real-time competition, we know there's something really good going on here. But we also know that there are consequences, and one of the consequences is how much work header bidding asks the browser to do. And if you think about particularly in a mobile context, that browser is loading text, it's loading images, now it's probably loading videos, auto-playing videos, sound, the user's scrolling through that content. And on top of all of that, we've sort of said, hey, why don't we have that browser also conduct a real-time auction across 10 ad exchanges and do that as well. And so we know that on the one hand, header bidding is or rather real-time competition between exchanges is not going away because it generates this great revenue lift. But on the other hand, we've got some user experience issues and some latency issues to sort through.
Yeah, I think the other thing here is that there is so much that can go wrong in implementing header bidding. We're getting to the point where there's a lot of very good best practices, but it's not really just things like, hey, there's only so many simultaneous network requests that modern browsers make that can impact how the rest of your page loads relative to how many calls to demand partners the browser makes. Like, that's a relatively obvious one, but it turns out if you have a pretty heavy page, things like the JavaScript call stack become an important consideration in terms of where you're loading your header bidding libraries or wrappers. Which is like, God, I do not want to think about that. It really should just work as much as possible. So there's a lot of nuances that can become very relevant here, and I think that this is another area where we're starting to see more of a maturation in the space, but it's kind of early there. So, a lot of inefficiencies here in many typical header bidding setups, And also, most of these, and most of the history in header bidding has been really focused on desktop display. So those are all things that we're trying to, move forward a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's the browser, right? Header bidding, the browser is the thing that has a header into which we can do this. So that's something we'll get into, as well as can we take this real-time competition and bring it to lots of other environments as well. So this is what can sometimes
actually.
Yeah, we did a photo shoot with Michael, and I just said put your head in your hands, and we got this. So what would, if we could just wave a magic wand, what would header bidding look like? Obviously it would have all the benefits it has today. We would add to that transparency and configurability for one, and you do have this today. You can say, well, it's in the browser, so it's already infinitely transparent and configurable. And that's sort of technically true, but it's nice to have good reporting on that. It's nice to make that really easy. It's nice to make that non-technical. So that's certainly one aspect of it.
Yeah, I think being able to really clearly see what's going on in your setup is one advantage of header bidding, but then running into things like, which of my 13 header bidding partners actually served this ad that this random user reported, that can become a little terrible. So being able to quickly and easily manage a lot of this and understand what's going on, in addition to providing transparency throughout your ad tech stack wherever possible, I think is pretty important there. And again, it's more of a maturation thing of like, do you really want your setup to be constantly going in and modifying JavaScript configuration files? Is that really the long-term approach to this? Well, probably not.
Lightning fast user experience, we covered that, but how do we get there? And we'll talk about whether or not server-to-server is the answer there. And support for all environments. We've mentioned this, but there are contexts other than the browser, or browser-like contexts, or other things going on in the browser not in the header. So video players, accelerated mobile pages, apps, potentially other environments. So how do we make something header bidding like, and the name header bidding maybe even stops making sense in some of these contexts, but bring that philosophy of a real-time competition to all of these environments and make it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you have a slightly different ad format or a slightly different delivery vehicle or environment that you're operating in.
Yeah, destroying the waterfall wherever we go is sort of our mission. But I think that some of the basic characteristics there are that all supply is accessible simultaneously to all the demand partners that are participating in that setup, which means you don't have a synchronous step through the waterfall, which means that buyers can have more choice and flexibility as to how they actually get that supply. Obviously, this has pretty big consequences when it when it goes from the old way of doing things, which had a lot of assumptions into that, into all of a sudden, a very short period of time, everybody is changing everything about how they go and buy and how you can access that supply. But in general, I think where we're heading towards is having publishers have the flexibility of which header bidding-esque partners they choose to be responsible for their supply. And it's not a matter of pitching one person in a priority layer above another. It's not Tom and I duking it out over who gets higher in a waterfall. It's that we're both there. We're both providing revenue. We're both providing a lot of value to the publisher as much as we can, side by side.
So let's talk server to server. So what is this server to server thing? I feel like sometimes when we talk about it in the header bidding context, we talk about it like it's completely new. But in the general sense, it's not new at all. OpenRTB is not new. This is how DSPs and SSPs have been communicating for a long time. So in some sense, it's not new at all. But in another sense, it is very new. And I think what's new about it is if you think of the way header bidding works today, it sort of naturally SSPs know how to put code on page and do things with that. And having a wrapper that combines code from many SSPs is sort of a relatively small technical step from maybe where we already were. But taking what server to server in a header bidding environment is saying, hey, let's actually move all of that up to a server layer, away from the browser, away from the user, where we can figure out all of this real-time competition there. And I think that's new, and not all exchanges and SSPs are ready to do that today in the way that they were ready maybe to do client-side header bidding.
Yeah, I think this is not the reinvention of an exchange. We have a thing of server-to-server connections between lots of different parties. It's called an exchange. So server-to-server header bidding isn't an attempt at reintroducing this concept that solved the intermediary problem. It's more of a way of header bidding in general also on this is saying, let's solve the inefficiencies with legacy ad servers that are preventing a lot of competition across the ecosystem to go up against my supply. And server-to-server is really a technical layer for making this a lot easier. So it's not just everything in a browser, it's bits that are directly on page in the browser and another layer that's having this relationship with publisher-focused parties that are providing more revenue for the publisher directly. So it's not a clearinghouse, it's not something that is trying to get thousands of bidders integrated or anything like that. It's really a pure tech layer. And so we both make a very clear distinction here that the server-to-server tech layer should be a tech layer. And you should think about that differently. You should think about your wrapper differently than you think about your demand partners and the people that are cutting checks to you. Now, in general, what we're seeing is that most people are providing both demand and this tech layer, which, incentives can get a little weird. But it's one where we're getting to the point where we can really start trusting each other because we're here in it kind of against the waterfall together. And it's not a matter about index is going to bias AppNexus's bids by a little bit or something like that. It's like we know that that's not going to be the case. It's about working with these other tech layers from the demand side and vice versa.
Yeah, we actually struggled with the labels on this slide because to your point, you can actually just relabel this slide and have something completely different. You can put Exchange or SSP in the middle there, and then you can put DSPs down the side, and you say, oh, well, this is something we've had for a long time. So, and that's literally the only thing you need to change, and you're telling a completely different story. So I think that tech layer point is really important. An easy way to think about it is just to think that we really want to take what's going on, for example, in the browser today and maintain that as we move it to the server, or give you the option of moving it to the server. So the browser is just integrating some partners and passing their bids along. It's the browser is not acting as an exchange, and neither is the server. So we want to sort of maintain that as we move forward.
So you might have seen a little while ago an announcement that Index and AppNexus have agreed to support each other's offerings. And it was kind of an announcement that we were going to do something together, which is always kind of a weird thing to announce. It's like, it's not out yet, that's okay, we're gonna go do something. But it was a really important thing for us to take a public stance on this together because of a lot of the historical trust issues that SSPs have had when it comes to server-to-server. If you're all on page, if a lot of SSPs are on page together, you don't really need to worry about somebody being an intermediary at the tech layer that could really hamper the ability of another partner to perform as well. So this was us together saying, we think that these issues can be solved, and we think that we can work well together in this environment, and we think that we've evaluated a lot of the proposals about what we're doing to the point that we can trust this. And this is, I think, signaling to the industry that this is a trend, that this is happening, or this is a trend, and that it is happening, and that we support it happening. And so that signaling was relatively important for us to provide. And then, of course, also we're doing the technical work alongside that to do integrations as well.
Yeah, and so what I would say is, we also want to sort of set a good example in terms of what a good server-to-server implementation looks like, and sort of lead the way on that, and help publishers figure out and evaluate what even are the criteria. And I had some great discussions on this last night over dinner. What even are the criteria by which, if I have 5 server-to-server offerings I'm thinking about, how do I even pick one? Does it even matter? Are they all the same? And they're not all the same, and we want to sort of help define what some of those criteria might be.
So in terms of what good server-to-server offerings look like, I imagine many of you are being pitched on early products here or are thinking about how you would evaluate this as it comes up. We both very strongly recommend a hybrid model, and a hybrid model is one that supports people directly on the page or through that server-to-server tech layer. And it should be up to the publisher as to who goes where. Now really there shouldn't be a whole lot of difference there. In an ideal world there is no difference between if somebody is behind a server-to-server wrapper layer header thing. Obviously nomenclature is still
server-to-server wrapper technology layer provider.
SDK.
So
step 0, have good naming.
Yeah.
So step 1, with a hybrid approach, you really want to be able to choose where you experiment how. If it's simply a matter of testing out somebody's demand and you don't really value them as a partner, you just kind of want to maybe see how they perform, lighting them up through a server-to-server wrapper is probably going to be the way to go in the future. But if it's a real investment with probably a top-tier partner, well, then you might want to consider, does it make sense for them to be on page? Does it make sense for them to be behind the server-to-server layer? Again, hopefully it doesn't matter over time. But I think it's still early in the industry and we're still working through making sure that it won't matter.
Yeah. So the way I like to think of it is, whether an exchange or demand partner is bidding on the client or the server it should just be a configuration option for you. It should just be a switch. You should just be able to say AppNexus server, AppNexus client, Index Exchange server, Index Exchange client, or anyone else for that matter. It shouldn't be this sort of major implementation effort to move bidders around in that way. And similarly, actually moving on to the second point there, we think reporting should all come together as well, right? So if you have, and I think it's important to have one tech provider for both client and servers to enable the controls and reporting to work like this, so that you can say, oh, I've had this bidder participating in the clients, and here's the revenue I saw, here's the latency I saw, here's the user match rate I saw. I moved them to the server, and I was able to measure the change there and do some of this experimentation.
So I have a question, thank you, and I apologize for interrupting, but I think it's maybe for me a little bit of a light bulb moment, having not thought all this way through. I've been thinking about it in terms of going from header bidding to server, but with the hybrid approach, you're saying it's not one or the other. You're probably going to work with server-to-server integrations, work that into what you're doing, and then again over time, all of this is going to evolve. And it's going to play out in multiple ways. Yeah,
and we don't want to create this kind of step function change for publishers where one day you have to do something very extreme where you say, yesterday I had 10 bidders in the clients and then I moved to server, and so now they're all in the server.
Right.
We want to enable this incremental change where it's new functionality that you have. It's a new dimension. It's a new vector of control. That the publisher is in control of.
It's almost like while you were saying that the Earth moved. Everyone else, okay. Thank God you all just reaffirm that. Sometimes I think I feel things.
This is California, so it could have.
I just want to say, when you say go back, I did this whole session literally the whole place shake. That's kind of cool. Yeah, let's hope that stops. But so it sounds to me like I'm just sitting there looking at it, going there'll be some partners I could just sit there and go, server, let's go this way. Again, I'm reducing my overall latency, but others are going to work for some particular reason in particular ways. But then I guess one of the things I always thought with the server plus and minus, and again, educate me please, which is I kind of thought everyone would just move all their header partners into one server-to-server solution. Right, so that I'm going from 7 to 1, right, or 1 and a little bit.
One client-side connection.
But a little bit in terms of speed or whatever, and then my reporting and all that stuff would be in one place. But it sounds like that's still going to be the hybrid of I'm going to get from the multiple partners and pull all that together.
So I think you have to consider the timelines here as to when these decisions happen. So there are a lot of potential trade-offs to server, which is one reason why it hasn't really picked up in the way that client-side header bidding has. So things like cookie match rate between different providers, that above almost all other things can have a significant revenue impact if you have poor cookie match rates. So making sure that as partners get lit up, and this is probably on a partner-by-partner basis, that match rates are great, not just acceptable, but as great as they possibly can be, or that there's a completely separate solution that like Digitrust or something else that's solving that. Those are all things that are going to happen over time. The other thing here is that we're still just now working on a lot of these integrations from the SSP side into these pure tech layers. And it's really that wrapper tech layer, client-side or server-side, it's that wrapper's responsibility to make sure that demand partners perform as well as they possibly can in the setup, whether it be client-side or server-side. So client-side is easy and fast to get up and running. It's easy to manage for some publishers. It's easier to manage than potentially a server-side thing could be because they can get a lot of deep control on how something is integrated onto the page. I think a hybrid approach makes a lot of sense for right now, though we'll see what happens in a year or something like that, when it might just make sense to have a lot more server-side configurations in place.
To your point around, how will this evolve? Is it, and I think there are sort of two possible paths here, and it might depend on the publisher and the vertical and things like that. Path one is sort of what you said, which is we being publishers move all of their demand to the server because lightning fast user experience is what matters. So we need as little happening on the client as possible. So we're just going to put everything on the server, and I think that's path one. Path two is sort of the hybrid approach sort of dominates for some time to come, and the way that would work is picking and choosing sort of your very best partners, your very best performing partners to live in the browser or in the client where they can directly read cookies and user IDs and get the best possible match rate, and then kind of put the long tail of demand in the server so that you kind of have a finite number of slots, if you will, in the client, but not ad slots, more like partner slots that is conceptually that live in the code, if you will.
I just don't want to have a session at AdMonsters where we talk about having 7 server-to-server integrations on every single page, and server-to-server stacking.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think
let's just not do that. Can we just get to some point where we stop?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to the tech layer versus the demand layer.
Right.
You should really consider your tech layer there and make sure that the tech layer that you choose has all the partners that you want or has enough of hooks in to get the right partners that you want integrated at that tech layer, and that you're evaluating the tech layer for things that aren't just the demand it provides, if it even provides demand, but it's also things like reporting, it's also things like support, it's also things like whatever comes up from that tech relationship. And you should think about the wrapper as kind of a different vendor than people that are just cutting you checks. Also, there's one more path to talk about there beyond what you mentioned. That's, of course, using an ad server that doesn't have a lot of the challenges that header bidding that gave rise to header bidding.
So. That was not one of the rehearsed. So let's talk about best practices. We've covered some of this already. Let's dive in a little more detail. So number one, start now, and because of this hybrid approach, there's really no reason not to. You can sort of enable server to server right away and have one bidder up there, see how that works, and then make a roadmap that works for you, migrate on your schedule.
Yeah, there's no reason to wait for server to server to become a thing for you to start doing header bidding. Like, it's important enough, the impact is real enough, the best practices are well known enough, there's no reason to hold back. You should be starting this right now. The question then becomes, like, how aggressive do you get with setting up a lot of different demand partners? Well, then that you can start evaluating a little bit more carefully. But if you're not doing header bidding, it's really, you should really, really, really do it right now.
Understand the trade-offs. So we've talked about this a little bit already. There's a lot of nuance here, but I think the fundamental trade-off is between user experience and latency and user match and revenue. So it's, again, it's maybe you'll put some of your partners in the client because you want to maximize user match, you want to maximize revenue. Maybe you'll put some of your partners in the server, or maybe even all of your partners in the server because you want to maximize user experience and latency. I think that's the most fundamental trade-off. There's some other smaller issues, but I think that's really sort of the meat of the issue when we're talking about client versus server. I
think there's another kind of major trade-off there in terms of ownership. If you are doing purely client-side setup with a wrapper that you've built yourself, which, by the way, you probably shouldn't do. Just go use Prebid or something like that. Or if you're managing your wrapper setup closely with a partner that is doing that wrapper setup for you, you have a lot more ownership over that setup than you might with a pure server-to-server situation. Now, obviously, the trade-off there is that you're giving up some of that ownership for ease of use and for convenience, and because it makes your job a lot easier every day, probably. But that is something to consider. A pure client-side header bidding setup will give you full control over that setup. But it also means that you have to be very closely managing the user experience impact. You have to be really owning that, and you have to be really carefully managing your demand mix, which, again, it's fine if we're in these early experimentation days with header bidding, but it's not fine as we go more broadly across the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So talking about that the first trade-off we mentioned, I think our suggestion is if you're on the fence, which you might be in any given situation, maybe lean a little bit toward the user experience side of things. If there's a small revenue trade-off, a small user match trade-off, and you're like, well, what should I do here? Why not prioritize user experience? That's sort of the long game anyway. If you're really damaging user experience by having a really, really slow or heavy-handed bidder in the client, you might not be prioritizing the long term. Again, particularly on mobile, users expect lightning fast, snappy sites, and that's sort of our recommendation.
This is not a UI that either
I was
of us
about to
have
make
built.
sure. Can you just clarify that that's not the UI?
This is the UI. Yeah, this is how you.
Might be indexes
all that
UI.
control.
Like we said, you're in control. Too much control, but it's only 12 hours of training to learn how to use the first part of the UI, and then we go from there. So we put our favorite tech providers and SSPs in a hat, and we sort of shuffled it around.
Completely random choice.
We each reached in and pulled out a name, and these were the two names that came up. Select high quality tech providers and SSPs, and again, there's two things to select here. As Michael's been saying, there's who is going to provide this pipe, this server-to-server pipe that will get all this demand, without necessarily involving the browser and the client, and then what exchanges and SSPs are actually integrated into it, and which of them am I going to enable? So there's actually a few different choices to be made here, both of them important.
Yeah, I think when choosing a tech layer, that's really one of the more critical ones. If somebody is telling you to prioritize one demand over another, or if somebody is doing a strange line item setup in the ad server, those are things that really kind of hurt the whole point of header bidding, which is to provide equal access to all this demand. So it's really important to choose a tech layer that provides no bias, that makes sure that bids that are being passed in are the ones that ultimately are chosen in the final auction, to make sure that there isn't really any weird hijinks happening here as well. And so I think that working together and working with other high quality SSPs, both on the demand side, but especially on the tech layer side, is just critically important.
Yeah, you should be able, we were talking earlier about criteria, how do you evaluate, and there's some great ones in there, right? You should be able to get reports, you should be able to get logs, you should be able to know exactly what is going on in that tech layer. What bids did you get? What decisioning was made? What was the latency of all the partners that you had? What was the user match rate that you saw? You should be able to sort of very easily get all that data. I would say right down to the level of logs if you want to see them. And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't check those all the time. Maybe you never check them. But you should be able to, in principle. I think is sort of the important point there. We don't want this to be a black box in any way. So wrapping up. Header bidding has been great. There's still challenges. We've talked about a number of them. User experience, the work that we act as a browser to do. How do we take this great competition and bring it to other environments? Server to server is a tool in your toolbox, an additional tool in your toolbox that we want to give to you, put you, the publishers, in control of, so that you can manage user experience, latency, revenue. And that's how you should think of it, is another tool in your toolbox.
And this isn't, again, us reinventing an exchange or something like that. It's a new layer, a new technology layer, a new thing that's being introduced alongside client-side header bidding, I think, in partnership with it.
So that's actually the end of our slides, so we're very happy to take questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So thanks for now in my head, of course, inventing the idea of putting two vendor companies on a session together and to see how they do. I think you guys actually did a fantastic job of managing that. I'll give you extra applause for that. That was well done, gentlemen. Well done. Just real quick, and we have time for questions, and I will put some questions to all of you because I think there were some statements in there about like, yeah, you should do your own wrapper and stuff like that I know some of you have cut your teeth on and are proud of what you've done, that I think would be interesting to give feedback in terms of where that goes. I just wanted to go back to the announcement. This isn't, we're putting index into a AppNexus wrapper or vice versa or whatever, just that the conversation, like the two of you companies have decided we're going to work together on that tech layer, which I love kind of that approach to whatever, to see kind of where you could go as partners and start it versus, again, server to server to me has just been a lot of conversations about people saying, well, who am I going to trust to put my code into and so forth and so on. So I think that's really what the announcement is. We're going to get past that and move to the next step. Right?
Yeah, I think it's that we're both coming out with wrapper offerings that are focused on providing the server-to-server solutions alongside client solutions. We both have different approaches on that, but we both believe that we can trust each other's and work really well together in it, and that it's important for the industry to, see that this is happening and support it and go forward in that.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff at Shazam. In taking the responsibility of being the tech layer, what kind of commitments are you making to make sure that you're updating your RTB specs in time with all of your different partners and supporting all the different ad request parameters that they need in order to integrate with you? Because that's really where it might be great on the first initial launch, but further down the line, how do you integrate OpenX or Rubicon or any of these other partners into it?
Great question. I think that there's actually a few things that are happening in the ecosystem right now. We're seeing a lot of efforts around codes of conduct that are sort of starting to emerge as to how wrapper providers work, both client-side and server-side. A lot of it is due to safety concerns around transparency, bid biasing, all that kind of stuff. What hasn't been addressed is timeliness on updates, which you're talking about there. Even though we're starting to see some things happening in newer versions of OpenRTB that explicitly call out issues with header bidding, we don't necessarily know if, for instance, a particular parameter isn't being passed in from the wrapper. We can't then pass that to our bidders and our monetization suffers. We are seeing that today, which is a problem and a challenge. I think that ultimately, though, if the wrapper can't monetize the demand partners that are integrated, then the wrapper will fail. And so there's a huge onus on the wrapper to be able to make sure, we need to make sure that index monetizes super well because that's our job as a wrapper kind of component there. Now, the problem then gets to be a year after you've chosen your provider, and all of a sudden people are saying like, hey, I can't actually monetize because this newer field isn't updated or something like that. That's going to be a problem, but I think the incentives are in place to hopefully make sure that that doesn't happen a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the OpenRTB specifically, it's a conversation, right? Like ideally everyone's on OpenRTB 2.5 and supports it perfectly. That's not actually the reality, and so there's always a conversation there about who can support what when, who can support which fields, who needs which fields, and that's sort of an ongoing development, I would say.
Okay, I got a question over here, guys. One of the things I would like to just clearly understand is what is that actual tech layer solution that you guys are providing? So maybe I'm a bit confused here, but so there seems to be some kind of a partnership that you guys are coming together. Is it something like Prebid.js that is provided on the client side, but you guys are coming up with a tech layer on the server side that does something like that?
Yeah, well, the slide may or may not be helpful. What I might suggest is, so there's two things going on here, that we're each, Index and AppNexus, building a server-to-server offering, so that's thing one. And then in addition, we've announced this partnership in which we want to get together, work together. So I can tell you a little bit about what Index is doing, and Michael can tell you a little bit about what AppNexus is doing. The Index offering is we have a client-side wrapper today that lives in the browser. Mm-hmm. We are building a server-to-server offering on top of that, so that if you have the Index wrapper, the Index wrapper sort of extends to be a client and server together concept, where you can have demand participate in the client, you can have demand participate in the server, and there's a UI that lets you manage that and get reporting on that. So that's, and AppNexus is doing something a little bit different.
Okay, so basically from a publisher's perspective, like the way that I thought that solution that you guys are working together on is something sort of like Prebid.js, but for the server side, so that publishers have the ability to run multiple partners on the server side and be able to manage them that way, so that they can also have control over it. So like, it sounds like if I run AppNexus on S2S, it's not going to be the same implementation that I'm going to be having with Index Exchange for S2S. So like, how can we combine them all together in a wrapper on server to server so that we can host them on some kind of a cloud computing platform and say, okay, I have it, and it's just basically plug and play of any other bidders like Sovereign or Be Real Time and all those guys.
No, that's what we want to build, and so we're hosting it for you. I believe AppNexus. So the idea is we host it for you, we make it plug and play for you, we integrate all the demand sources you want, and it is plug and play. It is all UI driven. You're in control. That's the idea.
So a couple different components here. There's one that is the client-side wrapper layer, and that's Prebid or the Index offering, or there are a couple others out there. Those have different adapters in place. Those adapters communicate with each of the different demand partners that are present. In a server-to-server world, you have relatively the same setup. It's just that some of those adapters end up being, honestly, probably only one adapter, really, ends up being server-to-server enabled. And through there, you have additional partners that are integrated server-to-side with that kind of tech layer. One of the concerns with publishers implementing server-to-server directly, well, there are actually kind of a lot of concerns in that area. One is fraud. It's a lot easier for us, because we do this every single day, to be able to manage fraud and make sure that that doesn't get onto the marketplace. The other thing is simple infrastructure. We both have a gigantic number of data centers around the world. We have peering set up between our different data centers to make sure that when we do a bid request to Index and vice versa, like, it's really incredibly fast in a way that most publishers don't really have the scale to do. And this is what we do every day, all day. So having somebody who has the infrastructure that is like that and has familiarity with some of the exchange management controls that are important there is one of the reasons why I think we see companies like ourselves building out that tech wrapper layer on the server-to-server side.
So my question actually is, but this is not going, this server-to-server layer is not going to act as a mediation platform.
So we were actually talking about this a little bit. There are, with pre-bid, for instance, there are a couple different ways that you can run it. You can run it where it chooses the top bid that's received from all demand partners, and that gets passed in the ad server. And that's the only bid that's passed in the ad server. This makes the ad up setup a little easier, but a lot of people push for all bids to be passed in the ad server because it makes reporting a little easier, and it makes it easier for some demand partners to kind of see the whole flow of what was happening. I think it's something similar there with server to server, in that if there is any type of restriction on the bids that are passed in from the server to server layer, the only thing that happens is picking the top bid. So you could call it a first price auction. I would prefer not to call it mediation because then I immediately think waterfall, and I'm like, that's the opposite of what we're doing. So something there that basically just handles choosing the best bid to compete against the ad server should be the only logic that the server-to-server wrapper.
And this is another area where, again, it's the publisher's auction, if we want to use that term. We're just running it. so the publisher is in control of whether it's a first price auction where we just send one bid down, or whether it's unmediated and we'll pass all the bids through, or whether maybe we'd like to do something special around deals. Those are all things that we're talking about and want to enable on our roadmap. Because ultimately we're really just, again, trying to provide tools more so than dictate a particular approach to the tech layer.
Yes, because from what I understood, this was kind of a holdup with server-to-server was, I mean, there are several offerings out there right now that are more mediation platforms or just first price auctions, if we'll call it that.
Yeah.
But there was also a question whether demand partners will play together, because I don't think everybody is as buddy-buddy as you guys.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason the hybrid solution is one that's going to be around for a little while, is that there are going to be people who are not set up or will not work in a server-side wrapper layer for whatever reason. And, that's okay. We'll get there eventually. But there is still a lot of stuff that needs to be figured out, and it also changes depending on the format. For instance, people that might not be comfortable working on desktop or display might be fine working a mobile app because you don't have things like cookie match rates to be concerned with.
Question over here.
Yeah, so today, traditionally you deliver a standard display ad video. That's what we see delivered from header bidding. Do you see that changing with all of the new things that we're seeing, responsiveness, virtual reality? When do we expect to see the creative delivered programmatically to catch up to that?
There are a lot of ways to answer that. I think that as new formats emerge, hopefully the way that they are, kind of the assumptions that go into how they are set up in terms of providing demand is going to change. We've seen with native, for instance, that kind of skip through the ad server in a decent number of respects, and that's kind of good and also weird. It means that it's really difficult to provide a lot of additional demand sources, except if you're just sitting there kind of tag on page. So I think that usually what we're seeing is that there's people that are providing something really new, they end up kind of controlling the full stack, and that's fine until people realize that there's a whole wealth of demand out there that might wanting to be applied there, and we'll see more header bidding style things approach that rather than what we saw even as recently with mobile, where waterfall and kind of second-rate mediation still become the same. In terms of actual formats and everything, I think that's a very evolving question.
I would say that almost if we build the tech layer correctly, it should be relatively agnostic to the ad format or even the environment. And I think that's something nice about a server-to-server tech layer is, once you have all this demand integrated there's no particular reason that it should need to be heavily customized for some new ad format or some new environment or something like that. Which is not true of for an in-browser JavaScript implementation. You can't take all the demand that you have in a header bidding wrapper and say, well, I'm just going to put that in a video player now. I'll just copy and paste the code. It doesn't, or a mobile app or whatever it might be. It obviously doesn't work like that. But to a much larger extent, when you're on the server, it mostly does work like that, or it's a relatively small technology change in comparison. So I think we're well set up for that.
So can we announce our server-to-server-to-server alliance? Three of us. Well, can we do a presentation together? I kind of feel like
for sure, yeah. Maybe we need a tech layer to mediate all the tech layers, to mediate the exchanges,
yeah,
to mediate
right.
the
With data. Just put with data at the end of that, or
Yeah.
social. That's the
Yeah.
other thing. You just
Right,
put social on
right.
that. Guys, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Good job.
Thanks.